Welcome to the Science of Life podcast, where we dive deeper into the topics of nutritional science, Ayurveda, yoga, and personal development. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Science of Life. Today I have Rodolfo Young with me, a former US Army Special Ops soldier, and he turned into a motivational speaker and master coach. He has been featured alongside today's top thought leaders in both business and personal development, including names like Deepak Chopra, Sharma, and Eckhart Tolle. He spent 2 years in total in silent practice, diving deeply into his own heart and healing, and emerged with a passion and purpose to help people uncover their deepest brilliance and expression. Today we talk about the foundations of healing. We talk about Rodolfo's own path and his advice on how to achieve healing. Without further ado, I welcome Rodolfo Young to the podcast. Hello and welcome, Rodolfo, to the podcast, The Science of Life. I'm really happy to have you here. And we have a big topic ahead of us, which is around healing. But before we go into that, it would be great if you could just introduce yourself to the listener. Who are you? What brought you here? What is your work? And
Well, thank you so much, Danya, for having me on the podcast. I'm super excited actually to talk about healing as our topic today. It's pretty much who I am, I would say. I have a healing center here in Bali, Indonesia. I've been in personal development and body work, energy work for probably about 22 years, trained in more than 20 styles. And at this point, I think what really brings me inspiration in life is getting to watch the layers melt away on people and their brilliance come up. It's why my center here in Bali is called the Brilliance Center.
And you have a quite interesting life story. Maybe you just want to go shortly into your own path to healing, maybe? Before we dive deeper.
Sure. Whenever people ask me to tell the story, it's funny because people will introduce me to other people like, this guy's got such an amazing story. And I'm always thinking to myself, which story did I tell them? There are a few different big moments in my life that have, I guess, created and influenced the direction of my life. And I think especially when it comes to healing, what really set, I guess, that direction going was years ago when I first started to get into this, actually even before I got into this. When I was a child, I was afraid of touch. Like, I don't know if I was just super sensitive and had that sense already that, when we connect with one another, that there's a lot more happening at that physical, energetic level, and also just emotional and how it affects our nervous systems and things like that. But just as a kid, I was just afraid. Even if I needed to pass somebody, I was afraid to touch them on the shoulder. I felt like I was invading their space. And I ended up going and joining the military. And so I was in the US Army Special Ops for about 6 years. And immediately by doing that, I kind of numbed that sensitivity. And when I came out of it, then I wasn't afraid of touch anymore. And I remember I started to work at a residence hall in a university, and I was going to university. And I would just start giving shoulder rubs to some of my friends there, some of my colleagues that I was working at the residence hall. And I would sit there just working on people's shoulders because I had this endurance from the military training. I think I missed that sense of touch with people. And one day, while I was just finishing a shoulder rub with some girl that was just a friend of mine there, and she was paying me. I was doing it by donation. One of the university police officers walked into the hall, and he saw what was going on. I was working at the front desk at the time. I was kind of mixing my work. And out of curiosity, he came up and he asked, "So where did you get your license?" I thought it was such an odd question. I was like, my driver's license? What are you talking about, my license? He's like, "No, your massage license." And I started laughing. I thought it was hilarious. I'm like, a massage license? Like, I need to be licensed to? And he kind of shook his head and he goes, "Yes, actually, in the state of California, and actually I think in most states and most countries, if you're going to be doing touch in any form and receiving money for it, you need to be licensed by some governing body." I did not know this. And so technically, I actually got into this entire path through prostitution, because that's what it was. I was taking money without license and touching people. So I realized, okay, I don't want to be in an illegal industry here. So I will go and do the minimum, bare minimum, massage technician, and be legal with it and have a license. And I fell in love. I fell in love with the work. I fell in love with the many, many different modalities. And I kept training and training. I think I took more than 1,000 hours of different styles. And that was just the classroom work. And then after that, thousands more of practice hours. And yeah, I've really fallen in love with it. And over the years, developed my own style as well as my own philosophy around just what healing really is.
And it's not only your love for touch in a way, or like your sensitivity to touch. I think you also developed yourself, or your life shaped you in a way to become a speaker, right? Mm-hmm. And a coach, and maybe to get a little bit into that path, like what do you do now? What is your work and how did it came all together for you?
Well, I think it was just a natural progression of first getting into body work. When you really train in body work, you process a lot of your own stuff, because you're not only giving and learning how to give, but you're receiving a lot. And there's so much that's trapped in our tissues, in our muscle, in our nervous system. And when it starts to move, you start to learn things about yourself. You start noticing patterns. And then you start noticing it in your clients as well. And I think what happened was I went from body work and doing these sessions with people to starting to understand the patterns that were going on, which led me into coaching. And then I started to kind of collect those patterns and actually start writing first. And so I'm also an author. I've got 6 self-published books out there. And finally to speaking, where I started. This actually only happened, I want to say maybe 8 or 9 years ago, just before I went into a year of silence, funny enough. I decided to do a bunch of heart talks just before I went silent for a year, because I think I have a lot of wisdom to share. I'd like to share it, and realized I also had a passion for speaking. And since that time, I've continued to pretty much give a talk almost every week. I call them my heart talks, and they're on different topics of practical wisdom, life, love, relationships, everything above and beyond. And really what I love about speaking is it's a way of engaging conversation with people that also is a practice for me to surrender to what comes through. So even when I'm speaking, whenever people come to my heart talks, they'll notice that I come in there, I don't have a script. I'm not memorizing something and going up and reciting. I just have a topic and I see what happens. And that has become a practice for me to surrender to this moment and see what wisdom wants to come through, because then I learn. And I get to continue learning every time.
Yeah, and you mentioned shortly that you went into a year of silence, and I think you did that even twice.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to share a bit about that.
Sure. So the first year in silence, it was actually because of a fairly sad reason. It was back in 2011, and at the beginning of that year, it was like the top of my life. I had just done a TEDx talk. I was in negotiations with the governor of Bali to create this massive program to make Bali this kind of pinnacle island of consciousness and an example for the world. And my partner at the time had come to me and said, I'm pregnant. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, for everything that I've done in my life, everything I've learned, processed, all the service I've done in things, none of it is as significant as I'm going to be a father. And I got really excited. My heart probably opened up massively. And here's the thing with life, and this is also part of the philosophies that have come through around healing. Everything that goes up must come down. And that's not a bad thing. It just means that you know that life is in cycles and waves. And when something is going really high up, you need to know how to fall with grace, because you are going to fall, and then it's going to go back up again. It's just a wave. I hadn't learned this. And towards the end of 2011, my partner miscarried. We lost the baby. It caused so much turmoil in our relationship that we lost the relationship. And because I had invested so much of my worth, my value, and my excitement into having a baby and being a father, it crushed me. And mostly, I lost my confidence. And I know what human nature is, and this is one of those things that people do when they say they're healing. Most often, they're distracting. And that's human nature. We will look for a way to involve ourselves in other things other than the discomfort. Or we will try to fill in the cracks with things and distractions. And this doesn't heal anything. This just helps you ignore it or bury it. And I understood that. And so instead of doing that, I decided, okay, I'm going to face this head on. And I think I need about a year, and I'm going to go silent. And so for 365 days, I went inward to feel, to notice, to see how I could heal my broken heart, because that's what it felt like. And here's the thing. I went in, spent most of the year silently, and towards the end, probably the last week or so, I started asking myself, okay, does my heart feel healed? Have I healed my heart? And I got this resounding voice in my head that goes, no. Like, what? What the heck? I just spent a year in silence. This was not easy. How can I not have healed? And all of a sudden I realized what I had been saying to myself the entire time. The phrase I kept saying was, I'm in a year of silence to heal my broken heart. I need to heal my broken heart. So pretty much I was reinforcing for an entire year that I had a broken heart that needed to be healed. That was probably the biggest moment of healing and realization for me, and it's one of the things that drives so much of my work now, is that our wholeness, our completion, our health, our whole health, healing, purpose, passion, everything that you want to say of being a fulfilled human being is already there. It was there when you were born. It'll be there when you die. The only thing that changes is the stories that we put on top of it, the conditions that we impose upon it. And like a mirror or a light bulb that gathers dust, you have to clean it every so often. So you have to clean the stories. And that is what, in that moment of realizing that I'd been saying this story to myself, that my heart is broken, I decided to start saying a different story, or at least to let that one go. And I finally was able to start to go back into relationships. I'm happily married now. And this is a key piece that people always ask me, what did I learn out of that year in silence? It was that we hide behind stories. And when we let them go, we can finally flourish as the true beings that we are.
Was it only the last week that made you realize that? Because I imagine a year in silence gives you a lot to listen to your stories, right? So was it something that you realized within that silence? And I mean, it must have been also like not easy to like live in this world where so much is about like what we speak, you know, like even just small daily interactions. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious how that shifted how you interact with people maybe, and also did you have the chance to be aware of all the stories within that year of silence?
This is a great question, and definitely through the year there was a lot of lessons and a lot of wisdom that came up and a lot of insights, and also a lot of other healing. But it really wasn't until that last week that I realized that the crux, the main thing was the story. But what I did realize is we have a story, and that's going to be in the mind, right? And the mind then has an effect on the physical. But the physical, as it starts to have trauma or story imposed on it, or contraction, or whatever it is that's happening, it starts to accumulate this sense of unsafety, and the nervous system is active, super active. We get into survival states, right? Fight or flight. There's massive anxiety, all these things. And what I really realized, and it was partly because of this year in silence, I was forced to become more vulnerable and show my emotions in order to communicate. Because since I wasn't using words, which we can hide behind, you know, you ask somebody, how are you doing? They're like, I'm fine. And you're like, okay, well, you said you're fine. I'm going to believe you. But their emotion saying something else, I couldn't hide the emotion. because it was the only thing I could communicate with. And so I started showing more of my emotion. Now this caused some interesting reactions in people. Some, they didn't know how to handle it. Others fully embraced it. And what I found was the difference. When I showed my emotions in a container of I'll call it safety, meaning it was, okay, this is a person that I trust won't judge me. This is a person who's going to be interested and curious about what I'm sharing through my emotion, has an interest in my well-being. Then I could share, and it would be this beautiful, beautiful process of expression and understanding. Actually, it was one of the ways when people would try to communicate with me in that silence, some would sit there and you could tell they were so in their own head and not present to me that no matter what I gestured or made a body language thing of or showed emotion of, they just weren't getting the message. And it could be so simple. It'd be like, can you give me a glass of water? And I'd be pointing at the water and I'd be pointing at a glass and they'd be like, I don't know what you need. Because they were in their own stories. Those who came out of their stories and became curious, so this is one of my key phrases in the healing process, is curiosity. When they became curious, they would catch stuff so quickly. I could make 2 motions of my hand and they'd be like, okay, so we'll meet at the coffee house at 5. They would read into stuff like crazy. It was amazing. So I think the year in silence taught me, and funny enough, I hadn't realized these things were the lessons until much later, like to put a, I guess, structure to what we live through takes an effort. You have to actually go back and look and be like, oh, what happened there and how was I doing that and why did that affect this? And for me, my entire philosophy of healing has formed out of these things, out of becoming more sensitive to touch as a powerful tool, learning how to then do that in a way that creates safety, learning how important emotions are, and also speaking to people's stories. Because let's say you just negate somebody's story, that's an attack on their story, and they're going to buffer up. If instead you can speak to a story and be curious of, oh, why do you believe that? Why is that there? And how's that affecting you physically? Well, let's check into all of that. No agenda of trying to change it, but just seeing whether it's true for them or not.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and we already got like kind of deep into the topic of healing. I want to make like a small introduction again to healing and then go into some questions. When you look up to heal in the dictionary, it says to make sound or whole again, to restore to original purity or integrity, or to overcome something, to maybe overcome an undesirable condition. And I find it really interesting because all these definitions basically imply that you're not whole. And you touched on that in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can go a little bit into that idea of you said that about your broken heart, your story, to realize that's the story I tell myself, right? It's a little bit different, right, when we have a broken bone. Mm-hmm. That's obviously broken, and we need to attain mending. But yeah, I would like to go into the idea of being whole.
I love this because most people, and even today, whenever I work with clients, when they come to me and say, I heard you're a healer, like, can you help me with this? I go, wonderful, what's your intention? They're like, well, I don't want to feel this anymore. I go, well, then I can't help you. Because healing is not about dismissing, ignoring, getting rid of. We often use the word clearing. And this is such a misunderstanding. We don't clear things, we integrate them into that wholeness. Because it's as if there's a part of you that's hurting, or a part of your past that's created a trauma within your system, it's still a part of you. It's just that it has contracted, it's we'll call it fermented and corrupted in a way. And so you just have to give it some life again, which is just by giving it acknowledgement, recognizing it, giving it some attention, some love. And in so doing, you start to shift what's happening in it. I'll use quasi a little bit of a woo-woo philosophy here of, people when they talk about energy work, one of the first things whenever you're training in energy work is a facilitator will teach you how to protect yourself. And I've always thought this was kind of funny because I look at energy and I just see it as it's a charge. And that charge is going to react in somebody's system based on the stories that they have about it. And most of the time when it's stagnant, meaning it's gotten stuck in a story, that's when it creates dis-ease. Because our lives are always changing, but if our story's not changing, we're in this discrepancy to life. So rather than thinking that you have to protect yourself, it's more about, okay, if that charge starts to move, it's not stagnant anymore. If it moves into me, I can decide what I want to do with that energy, that charge. What story am I applying to it or not applying to it? In that same way, we look at this idea of anything that's going on within ourselves, where most people are feeling a negative charge. It's not the charge that's negative. The story is negative. Their evaluation of it is negative. The charge is neutral. When we can start to look at it that way, then all of a sudden we start working on the things that actually matter and not the thing, whether it's whatever we attribute as a trigger to that charge, an event of our history, or something even that's recurring now as a pattern. Instead of looking at that as being the problem, it's how we're responding to it, what we're feeling about it, and what we're thinking about it, the stories we're making up.
Do you believe that our stories that we tell ourselves also cause like a crack in the system in a way, when we talk about being susceptible to like certain things more, or what would you say is the effect of these stories, or why do we attract certain things?
I love the fact that you use the word crack. I would use the word a leak, right? It's almost as if you have this beautiful vase as the container of your life. And throughout your life, you're pouring in these experiences. And it starts to fill up. And, at first it's this beautiful clear liquid. And then you start to identify to it. And as you identify to it, you are creating some of these stories. You're creating an attachment. And it starts to solidify. And as it solidifies, we actually also start to forget that the container was there. We forget the vase is there. And the stories become leaks in that vase, because when we want to feel fulfilled, it's that we want a full life. We want a full container and we want a full vase. But what we do is we say things like, oh, because of this thing that happened, I'm not worthy of this, or I'm too old to do that, or I'm too weak to do this, or that person's mean to me. And all of these stories are like little cracks or little holes, little leaks. That's letting all the energy of our life go, the power of our life. And for me, when I talk about healing, it's about sealing those leaks first, which means shifting the stories. As you start to shift the story or let go of limiting stories, then all of a sudden whatever hole was there is not there anymore. You're whole again. You start to become the full vase, because we're always essentially pouring something into that vase of our experiences. The question is, are we actually experiencing those experiences, or are they coming and going? It's kind of like anybody who has a scarcity mindset. Even if they had $1 million, if they have a scarcity mindset, which is a massive story that they don't have enough, that's a leak. So it doesn't matter how much they put in, it's going right back out. The moment that you seal the leak, you don't even have to put that much in to fill it up. And then you start to feel like you have enough. You start to feel fulfilled in life with purpose.
That brings me to my next question about the difference of cure and heal.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that medical approach, which is basically centered around curing, but it can be quite different from healing. Mm-hmm. How would you express that?
Well, normally, again, if we're looking at healing as being defined as wholeness, bringing back to the integrity of a whole system, a whole ecosystem, a whole body, a whole person, right? Then cure normally is speaking about specific fragments or pieces of a system, and often not even that, but just the symptoms of a system. It's even hard to say. And so when you look at the word cure, I believe, I haven't looked it up in a long time, but I remember the last time I looked it up, it was the first time I realized that the word cure has nothing to do with whether you can move past or integrate or heal from an ailment. It has to do with whether allopathic medicine can do something for the symptoms. So even something as acute as a broken bone, okay, can an operation help with that? Yes, then we can cure your broken bone. But you mentioned it earlier before we started this talk, that what about people who lose an arm and then they have that phantom arm feeling? Like, even though it's not there, they still suffer, even have pain, thinking that it's still there. Is there a cure for that? Probably not, because allopathic medicine can't go in there and do something for that symptom. But it can be healed by looking at what's the story. What's the attachment? What are the emotions around that? There's probably some trauma that's stuck in the nervous system, and the nervous system is sitting there going, no, we've got to do something, like we're missing something. There's a sense of not being whole. And so then it's this process of kind of reestablishing what wholeness is.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And yeah, we talked before about that, because two questions I think are really important when we think about healing. And it's, can we heal even if no physical cure is possible? And I strongly believe in that, because sometimes we have to accept that some things cannot be cured in a medical way, but we can still heal and we can live like a fulfilled life. And the other way around, you know, can we cure a disease but not heal? And that was like when we got to the phantom pain. So what would you say is maybe the importance of like healing, or like shifting our mindset from curing to healing?
I think it's really important. I can use an example of another motivational speaker. He actually passed away a few years ago. His name was Sean Stevenson, and he was born with a condition where all of his bones were brittle. And so he never grew taller than, like, I think maybe 3 feet. He was in a wheelchair his entire life. But he became one of the most powerful personal development motivational speakers. He healed himself, but it doesn't mean that he cured his physical ailment. He just got okay with it. He realized, okay, that is who I am in my wholeness. It wasn't comparing it to some standard of, oh, this is what healthy or okay cured is. It was more about, okay, what lets him be happy? One of the happiest guys, like he used to do these little dance things on in his wheelchair on YouTube, and it was amazing. Really brought so much joy. And you wouldn't think that, because, oh, but you have this physical ailment, you can't get it cured, but he could heal. And so this is the difference, is we can change the quality of our life, regardless of what's going on physically, that whether modern medicine can fix it in the symptoms of it, but you can still heal the quality of your life and enjoy your life regardless. And I think that's where, again, that wholeness comes in. You stop looking at it as something's missing or wrong or this or that, but you look at, oh, everything has its place. Every piece within me, whether it's matching what most people have or not, is part of me and makes some balanced form of me.
Yeah, and I think a big thing in that are patterns. And I would love to look into patterns a bit more with you, and what it needs actually to reveal these patterns and like trace them down to being maybe a big part in our wounding, like our continuous wounding, and keeping us from healing. So maybe we can go a bit more into that.
Yeah. So obviously patterns, stories also is kind of similar. In order to first do anything with them, we have to become aware of them. And we have to be accountable to them. So often you'll see that somebody's maybe suffering, or even I get clients that come to me and they go, yeah, I want to heal from all my stress and my anxiety and this and that. And I go, okay, well, you know, what's creating stress in your life? And they're like, there is no stress in my life. Like, I'm a corporate lawyer and I've got lots of money and I work 90 hours a week and competing with all my colleagues and stuff, but I have no stress. Okay. So the first thing is we actually have to get people to realize what's real. And I have a 3-tier philosophy that I often work with people on, which is acceptance, permission, expression. And acceptance, a lot of times we mix up acceptance with the word tolerance. We think acceptance is, okay, this thing that I don't like is happening and I just have to be okay with it. And underneath, I'm hoping it's going to change. That's tolerance. You're just enduring with this hope that it'll somehow magically fix itself. The way I like to define acceptance is to recognize the reality of this moment. That's it. It doesn't mean you have to like it. Most likely you won't. But you have to recognize what's real. Because if you don't, you have nowhere to step from. If you're trying to step from some fantasy, projection, or interpretation, then you're not really accurately moving in a direction. You're instead moving in your stories. And so first step, get real. Accept what's really going on. And it might be, for instance, oh, I'm thinking of this in this way, or I'm reacting to this in this way. Let's say, for instance, language is a big thing. One person might say one type of word, and it means a totally different thing to somebody else. And all of a sudden, you have in a relationship that somebody said something, and the other one, flew off the handle, thinking, "How could you do that? Hold on!" And it's all because of the way they interpret the words. So the reality is going, okay, we have a different understanding of this concept. So now that we know that, now you can actually start the process of integrating understandings and definitions and then giving permission for something to change. That's where we go from acceptance to permission. For me, permission is all about allowing change, not forcing change, not manipulating change. All of that, this is what happens a lot when people go maybe to a therapist or even a coach where they have an agenda and they want to get rid of something they've already evaluated as negative. And because of that agenda is causing their nervous system and even just their psyche to resist it because you're attacking what is. First step, accept what is, see it for what it is, and then give it permission to change, because everything in life is actually trying to change. This is the beauty of when we talk about healing as being kind of magical, it takes work, but the work is to help get you to stop resisting the change. This is the difference. People often think I have to help it along the way, get it to change faster. It's like, no, it's changing already. Every expression of your life, everything that's moved through as a wave in your system wants to move through. But you probably stopped it at some point, held onto it, contracted around it, created disease around it, and now you're trying to alter the contraction, but you're still not letting go.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I think when we talked about, like some people really like not acknowledging what is, there's this one pattern of numbing, I would say. So I have that stressful job and like everything is just like, it's a lot, but I don't see that it's too much,
Yep.
And then I find also there's this other pattern. I mean, there are many patterns, but I feel like these are the most, or the two that like keep us most into our stories. And the other one is like, I'm too sensitive for everything, and this causes this and this causes this,
Yep.
and so there's also like kind of an illusion about stressors that are not even stressors, so I don't know if you want to go a bit into that, but yeah, I think also like I add one more thing into it, since we're living in Bali and you mentioned it in the beginning, there's a big thing around healing, and it's, I would say, the main topic on this island and the main reason why people come. And I can definitely see, well, the minister, like there were like talks around the government, like even enforcing that. I think that maybe we can also touch a bit on the topic of like chasing a holy grail of healing.
Yeah, this is something that, and I still see it a little bit, but in the past, I've been here in Bali for about 16 years, and they would come very specifically to heal, and they would come and they'd be really determined and committed to it. And it was so interesting to me because I would see people, they'd go through a big process, they'd clear whatever, integrate something, and then as soon as it was done, they'd be like, okay, what else can I heal? I'm like, why? Why would you? Let it be. And this is the thing is, there will always be change in our life, and change causes some discomfort. The discomfort is what people are trying to heal instead of letting it happen. And then, because sometimes they numb, they're not feeling any of the discomfort anymore. So they think, there must be something else that I should heal. I will create something in my system by looking for it, and then heal from that. And then they're kind of in a cycle of, it's almost like an endorphin hit where they're going, look, I did something. Like there was a problem and I healed from it. And then when they do that and they don't have a new problem, they're like, oh, how do I get that feeling of satisfaction again? Oh, I'll create a new problem. And then they do it again and again. And this is where what you say of chasing the holy grail of healing, people never think it's enough. And I personally believe that patterns will surface when you slow down enough for them to catch up to your awareness. You don't have to chase after them. Actually, you're not chasing anything. You're creating new patterns. The old ones are still catching up. So you're just piling it on. If instead we live our lives, and then when something comes up, we deal with it in that moment. But this is the funny thing. People literally, and this is why I said that at the beginning I used to see people dedicated to stuff. Now actually, while people do still come to Bali to heal, they come and they immediately get distracted by peak experiences. There are so many facilitated events, modalities, retreats, and all these things where people can have these amazing catalytic moments, breath work, kirtan, a healing from a high priest or high priestess. Like all these things can really create a massive, like, whoa, new perspective on life. But all that was the beginning of the healing process. But then people get addicted to that. They go, oh, I'm going to breathwork every single week. I go to a cacao ceremony every single week. I'm doing 5 hours of yoga or They've missed the point. Because those were just catalysts to wake you up to see, oh, hey, this is what was real. Because you felt such a big shift because you were denying what was going on in your system. Now you see it. Okay, now work with it. Don't just keep going to a distraction of a peak experience. For me, I think what normally happens is people have this catalyst, and then sometimes there'll be a catharsis at the same time. And that's essentially, it's almost like a part of the psyche goes, wow, I can't believe I've been living like this for so long. And it grieves. And that's the catharsis. You have all these tears and emotion come up. And that kind of continues. It's not like you get one good cry and then you're done. But you have a major catharsis, and then the real work begins, and that's the clearing. And not clearing in the sense of getting rid of things, but clarifying what's true. Digging deeper, noticing what's the root of things. Where is your motivation coming from? Where are the stories that you've been telling yourself really coming from, and are they helping you? That's what I mean by clearing or clarifying. And then finally, as you keep doing that, at some point, you get to this level where you've kind of clarified so much in your life that you start to realize what you really enjoy. You start to realize what you really want to build, whether that's maybe a relationship or your own sense of freedom and abundance or just your joy and your happiness. And you go, wow, I want to do more to bring myself joy. Great, now, final stage, cultivation. That one is for the rest of your life. When you realize the things that you really want in life instead of the things you've been running away from. Because most people are in a pattern of avoidance. But when you stop running because you start to realize, I can accept this moment and see the reality, and also part of that reality is my choices brought me to this point. Now, also those choices are your empowerment. You can start making new choices, and you get that clarity. You start cultivating something you really want.
I think it's so important. There were so many gold nuggets in what you said. Coming back to, healing as an addiction, I would like even term it.
Yeah.
And not giving ourselves the time, like you said, we have major peak experiences, and that like is not even like a healing session sometimes. It's like an experience in life. And how much time do we actually give ourselves? And I'm talking to myself too, because I think we can all find ourselves guilty in a world of instant gratification. And like if you just push harder, things come faster, and that like idea of success, and how you achieve success. And I think we just missed that. Like really, we have in German a specific word, it's like when you have like, it's a kind of boredom, but not really. We call it Muße haben. And it means, there's just like no distractions. And there is just, really the space to like heal basically, without needing to do anything. And I think we can often just fool ourselves, especially when we have done a lot of work already, when we've done a lot of yoga, we've done a lot of healing sessions, and we think that the more we do, the more we heal, or we don't even realize that all of this is just a distraction, you know. And we judge other people for their distractions, which might be more obvious, like watching TV, but I think it's something really important that you mentioned. And I want to come for our last point to a really important topic in my life, and I think in general it's a very important point when we talk about healing, and it's the emotional root behind physical illness. So maybe we can go a little bit into that.
Yeah. Before I do, I'll say one last little point to this idea of the integration period for healing. I really love this statistic or study that I read up on a while back about bodybuilders when they go to the gym and they work really hard, and let's say they do that 5 days a week. They're not actually growing any muscle for those 5 days, but the 2 days they take off, that's when the muscle grows. It's in our resting periods that we give our bodies the opportunity to heal, integrate, embody. If we're constantly active and chasing the next healing experience, you're never giving your body the peace to actually do the work. So, yeah. So then, to this last final question, can you repeat it real quick?
I was asking about the importance of like emotional, or the emotional root of physical diseases.
Emotion is literally, we look at just a word, it's energy in motion, it's a wave, it's a charge. And we know that our emotions can have a passionate charge to them. They can be depressive, they can be heavy, they can be light. There's all sorts of different qualities, right, to our emotions. But in essence, they're waves moving through our body. And if you look at an animal, when it has a high emotion, one of the first things it does is it shakes. Like, feels this high emotion and it just goes, like, shakes it off. Humans, we stub our toes and we're like, and we like bury it in somewhere and like save it for later. This is why we get dis-ease, because we create a contraction instead of a release. Emotion comes to go. It's not coming to stay, right? We get an emotion even of anger. It's a release of tension. It's not meant to then go into story and wonder, yes, that person made me angry and that's why I'm angry and now I'm going to be angry all day long. This causes you disease, makes you suffer, in other words. If we think of it in terms of, is the point of life to avoid suffering or to feel joy? which one would you like? And I like to say that if you really want to heal, start to put your focus on finding joy in life, which means the feelings that feel good, move towards more activity that does that, more things. Give yourself permission for those emotions. When we're focused on the emotions that we don't want, which the emotion came up and it went, it's the story that's stuck around. When we get stuck on the story, then we create that contraction and our body isn't able to change as it's supposed to. Our cells are supposed to be replenishing and restoring themselves all the time. But if you're constantly telling the cells, no, you're a broken cell, you can't, you're defective, well, then you're creating that dis-ease in your body. I used to work a lot with cancer patients in Australia. And what I kept finding was that it wasn't diet. Some of them were so fit and so healthy and lived such good physical lives and didn't even have so much stress. But every single time when I would talk and dig in a little bit, I would find out that there was some major emotional trauma that had happened. A loved one had passed away suddenly, traumas from their past, different things. And that was what was causing the cancer, or at least we'll call it, was agitating it and keeping it flourishing. And I think that's the thing, is emotion, we have to face our emotions. But that can be hard, right? If somebody has been depressed for a long time, they're not really in a state of mind to look at the depression. Or if they're dealing with anger, they're not really going to be in a state of mind to deal with it. So this is where the way that I work comes into play. I first address the nervous system. Because if somebody doesn't feel safe, then they're in their survival mentality. They're in fight or flight, or freeze and fawn. We've got many things that go on in that survival state. And they're not going to have any sense of logic or practicality or creative solutions. They just want to self-preserve. And if curling up in a ball and numbing or distracting themselves helps them self-preserve, that's what they do. And coming to them and being like, no, come out of that ball, come out of that room, come and play in the field, they'll be like, no, I don't feel safe. So first we create safety. At the physical level, that's working with the nervous system. You can do that through many modalities like craniosacral, nervous system co-regulation. There's all sorts of different ways that we can just sit with people and help them feel safe. For me, probably the key is that there never be an agenda. And that means that you go in with curiosity. I used that word earlier on in the podcast. That you're just looking to see what's there so that it can be accepted, so that you can get permission for it to change, so that then it expresses differently.
I think it's such an important point you made, and I think we can give ourselves permission to feel safe too, right? I just want to share shortly about two things you mentioned, like the safety and also the shaking of the body. And I think also when we've done quite some work to feel safe in our body, instead of just like chasing for more healing or whatever, or healing even after an event, and I can share that personally, like having a pretty bad motorcycle accident. I was still lucky, I lost consciousness, but after, I was like at the side of the road, they brought me there, and it was definitely not a safe space, like still like cars and all the traffic passing by. But my body started shaking, and I knew immediately I had a trauma release, right? And that also showed me, like with all the work I've done before, and that you work yourself with somatic experiencing, which I think is a really nice way to get into emotions that are stored in the body, to also see that, with all this training that you had, some events might seem highly traumatic, but you shake it off in a second.
Yep.
And that's not denying it. And I have to say, there were like questions that came up after that, and it got me into kind of like a, I wouldn't say depressed state, but a state of like, okay, I have to slow down, and there are some things that want to emerge in that space, right? So, you know, and that's the way how we can heal then, you know, and like how maybe, I mean, of course I needed to go to a clinic, do the wound cleaning, everything. That's not what I'm saying, but, you know, take good care of yourself, but also like these modalities, like everything needs to be addressed properly, right? But yeah, to also trust in ourselves more, you know, that we can do our healing, and that the body can do the healing, you know, also for these wounds now. They will heal, you know. They won't heal if I stress out or I don't give them the time, and it's a lesson in patience, of course. But yeah, I think that's something really important that you touched on, and that I just wanted to emphasize again. So, and also one more thing I want to add, that it's so interesting also talking about cancer, in which organ the cancer develops, right? Because every organ in the body, and we also have that in Ayurveda, is related to certain emotion, you know, so that's where we store them. And so that can be also like a hint, you know, where do I actually feel the pain? Where do I develop the disease, you know? What emotion could be connected to that? So, yeah. Just to wrap it up, you said like two important things where you mentioned steps, you know, one was acceptance and the other two, and then you had like 4 other things that you said which are important in healing, and I just, maybe we can just like repeat that them, and so like to wrap it up and everybody just to remember, okay, these are the steps.
So these 3 things are to help people come to a clarity: acceptance, permission, expression. Acceptance, recognizing the reality as it is, not through our stories, not through our interpretation, not through our evaluation, just what is it? What's really going on? As if you were an objective video camera looking at a scene. And then from there, giving permission for it to change. Because everything's wanting to change, we just have to allow it. We have to relax around it so that it can change. For instance, you the mention of, you know, the wounds after a motorcycle accident. If we're constantly looking, being like, oh, how's this going to heal? Like, I need to do this. Like, this is so bad. We're aggravating the wound through not letting our own healing system of our body do its work, because we're creating more stress, more adrenaline, more, I can't think of the stress hormone, but cortisol. So that's not helping the system. So relaxing into trusting and allowing for the change to happen. Within that, we start to find a clarity, and we give ourselves a direction, because we're going to allow the change, but we want to kind of direct which way it goes. And so that's where the focus of our mind goes. And we start focusing on, okay, this is what I want in my life instead of what I've been avoiding. When we do that, we start to nurture that, and we literally orient ourselves in that direction. And here's the beauty of change in life. We're always moving forward, but we need to know which way are we facing. So therefore, which way is forward? And we start to do that, and then we finally have expression as the third of these 3 steps. Expression is to be witnessed in your authenticity. It's to be seen for who you really are, instead of all the ways in which we try to emotionally or through identity survive, but rather how do we get to thrive through our own unique expression of life. So that's essentially how we can call these major steps of a healing process. What I normally see at the physical level, and also at the, we'll call practice level, is that people will, the initial thing that they'll have is a catalyst moment, where their denial, their illusions, their maybe even just ignorance, they don't even know, or their numbing, suddenly get shattered, and they are faced with truth. And they see reality. This is a catalyst where they go, oh, that's what's been going on. And then normally with that comes a grieving process, because it's kind of, we look back and we go, wow, so many years or so much time spent suffering unnecessarily. And then this catharsis happens. We start to, all the emotions we've been holding on to, all those moments we stubbed our toes and buried it somewhere inside, finally comes up, and we have this beautiful release of emotion. Once that starts to happen, we get into the clarifying process, where we start to notice the things that created those stories, we start to notice the patterns, we start to notice our own habits, we start to see what our real desires are, the way we want to feel, and we start to move in that direction. And as we start to decide that with clarity, then we can cultivate it, and that's the final step.
That's so beautiful. And I just want to add to the catalyst, when we talk about karma, so many people think that these catalyst moments are punishment, or that karma in general is punishment. But it's not like that. Like, of course, like every action leads to something,
Yep.
we, like, that's what you mentioned. We got ourselves to that point, but that's not a bad thing. It's an experience, right? And it also can help to clear things that are way older than our existence, So we always like self-center a little bit. We have that pity party or we blame ourselves or whatever. And I think that's just one important thing to mention, a catalyst is actually a blessing, and it's only for the better, and I think when you keep that mindset, then like healing is just something that will come by itself in a way.
Exactly, and I'll add to that a catalyst doesn't have to be dramatic, right? When we're not listening, when we keep ignoring it, it becomes louder. But for instance, when people come in and do sessions with me, I have a philosophy of a very gentle, slow approach. I don't force things. I'm not assertive in the way I do my healing. So it's actually by just creating that safety that all of a sudden things that have been being misinterpreted or denied or unconsciously avoided can finally be acknowledged and recognized, and that already is a catalyst. It's to shift from story to reality.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. And where can people find you? How can people get in touch with you, work with you?
So if you're in Bali, you can always find me at the Brilliance Center, my healing and self-development center here in Ubud. Otherwise, Instagram, Rodolfo_Young. Also my website, rodolfoyoung.com. These are all great places you can find me. If you even just Google my name, I'm all over the webs. And you can find some of the content that I put out there, some of the talks, for instance. But for one-on-ones, in person, come here to Bali.
So you don't do online?
I do some online coaching, more so through my programs rather than virtual one-on-ones.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to put everything in the show notes.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you again for being here, sharing your wisdom with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Danya.
Thank you so much for listening today. Please share the episode with people who might be interested in their own pathway of healing. Please subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. That always helps a lot to spread the word. And also feel free to check out my programs, such as the teacher training to become an Ayurvedic nutritionist on my website, daniaschumann.com. And you can also get in touch via social media. I share a lot of information about personal development, Ayurveda, nutrition, and yoga. You can find me on Instagram at dr.dania.schumann and on Facebook at Dr. Dania Schumann. I'm happy to connect with you, looking forward to hear from you, and wishing you all the best. Namaste.